Firstly, Mr. Andrew Brace, who tonight will be putting the questions and carrying out the interview. He is a renowned journalist who frequently contributes articles for not only our own dog press, but many other canine publications worldwide. His investigative skills should ensure an interesting and entertaining night. That's put you on the spot anyway. We all know him, of course, as unquestionably one of the United Kingdom's top all-round judges. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to give a big Golden Retriever welcome to Mr. Andrew Brace. Now I'd like you all to welcome our very own First Lady of Golden Retrievers. It is most important for us all to remember those persons who did so much to establish our lovely breed. One of those beacons is obviously Joan Tudor, who, together with her contemporaries, laid the foundations of the Golden Retriever that we all enjoy today. We have much to thank her for. Ladies and gentlemen, would you give her a Midland Golden welcome to Joan Tudor. So without further ado, let us begin our evening with Joan Tudor, and I hand over to tonight's Parkinson, Andrew Brace.
I'm sure that all of you in this room know a lot more about Joan Tudor than I actually do, being in the majority Golden Retriever people. But needless to say, her reputation is known worldwide. Joan's standing in the world of dogs was conveniently put into perspective when I was having a cup of coffee and a chat with Erica Jays earlier on, and she casually said to me, "Do you know Gwen?" And for those of you who don't realise who we're talking about, was the late Gwen Broadley. And everyone knows the opinion that I had of that particular lady. Gwen said that Joan Tudor was the best all-rounder judge of a Labrador. So that in itself is one hell of a compliment to follow. So you've come to listen to Joan, not to me. So first off, Joan, could you tell us a little about your family background and how and when you first became involved with dogs in general?
Sure. Andrew, to go back to my family background, it has to really go back to my school days, because I was educated at a Quaker boarding school in Darlington. And of course, as you know, we hold many championship shows at Darlington, and every time I go to a Darlington championship show, it's nostalgic for me, because it is in the South Park. And our playing fields, where I used to play hockey and lacrosse, used to face onto South Park. And very often we were allowed out in the winter to go skating in South Park. So always, Darlington shows had a great thing for me, and the first dog show I ever attended as a horrible child spectator, going around, talking to all the dogs, stroking all the dogs, the ones we really hate.
Well, the kennels are very keen to encourage spectators to come to dogs.
They are, but not horrible children, definitely.
They don't discriminate.
And so having gone to Darlington to see a dog show, that really got me going. I wanted a dog. We hadn't got any dogs in those days. But another thing about Darlington Championship Show, which endears it to me, of course, is that I won Best in Show there once with Christopher. So, you know, nostalgia, oh, great, and winning Best in Show at that particular place. It was wonderful. But anyway, my grandparents used to live in the Lake District, and we used to go up there regularly, and when I pestered my family for a dog, eventually my father agreed we would have a dog. So he went to visit kennels on the shores of Lake Ullswater, and that was the kennels of, nobody will remember, but I do, Mrs. Graham Spence, and she more or less instigated the breed Lakeland Terriers. So that started us off with Lakeland Terriers. Later on, having had lots and lots of Lakeland Terriers, which I loved, but swore I'd never have one, not of my own, because they're barky little things, and I didn't want a barky little thing. So my aunt also also lived on the shores of Lake Alderswater, and she had a golden retriever. And I used to spend a lot of my holidays up there with her. And so I said, this, of course, is the breed for me. And as soon as we had a home of our own, right, we go and get a golden retriever. And to get a golden retriever, I used to look at the local adverts in the papers, and we were very poor. And so we chose the cheapest one we could find, which was 8 guineas. That's £8, 8 shillings to the uninitiated. So we got our 8 guinea puppy, and I thought she was lovely. And I didn't know anything about golden retrievers, but I bought Mrs. Charleswood's book, and that, of course, was the only book at the time. And this, of course, became my Bible. I studied this, and I thought, oh, I really want to go. I'd like to have some puppies, that would be great. So I started going around to other local dog shows, and thought, well, mine doesn't look any different from the others. So perhaps I might try and show her. But I was far too nervous. I really was scared.
What sort of year was this, John?
Oh God, don't ask me that.
Approximately.
I don't want to go back as far as that.
Okay.
That must have been 1945 or 46. It was a long way back. I think it was 45 when my bitch was born, I think. And so I plunged my husband into showing this bitch, you see, and she actually got a third at a Richmond Championship show in the puppy class, and we thought this was wonderful. So of course I'd started, that was it. And I then started to study pedigrees because, well, of course I got to have some puppies from this lovely bitch. And I discovered that this 8 guinea bitch had got a wonderful pedigree. Her mother was little sister to champion Dorcas Glorious of Slat, who was one of the first golden retriever champions after the war. So, I mean, I'd really hit it well. It's a jackpot, sure, by accident. So that's how I started. Okay?
Absolutely. So, when you started out, who were the sort of major kennels, major breeders, major personalities at the time who possibly just now names in history books?
Probably a lot of people won't even know them, but my gosh, they were scary. They really were scary because they were all the landed gentry. I mean, we were always, Joan Tudor and I...
It's a bit like people look on you today.
Well, no, because I'm not landed gentry. I'm still the riffraff. But Joan Gill and I used to go around a lot, and one of the really well-known exhibitors in those days who really had gone long before the war was Mrs. Wentworth Smith, who for a long time was president, I think, and chairman of the Golden Retriever Club. Well, she used to refer to Joan Gill and I as the hoi polloi. That, of course, is the Indian term, so you know the sort of way we were looked at, not really quite the right type, but still, we managed all right. But Mrs. Wentworth Smith had a great influence on the breed in those days. And another person that I always remember being very, very influential at the time was, well, it wasn't one, it was two, it was Mr. and Mrs. Parsons, Fred Parsons, and they bred the Toredales from up north, and they bred a lot of dogs, and they were showing at the time, the first dog I remember them showing was Toredale Happy Lad. And others were Mrs. Eva Swindell, Mrs. Who else? Mrs. Stonix, of course, who really was my mentor. I admired her so very much, her Dorcas dogs, as my bitch was related to them, of course. I really admired her type, and I decided to try and breed to her type. And others, those were really the ones that were most influential at the time. And, well, of course, they've all gone now.
So you've got this foundation bitch who's got this wonderful pedigree, totally accidentally. Were you, at that point, already sufficiently aware of the breed to be able to assess where this bitch scored and where she failed? Or,
Not really, no, I wasn't. No, I admit I didn't really know. I had to sort of ask other people because I hadn't got the knowledge of the breed. All I knew was that I really wanted to line breed with her. And of course, looking at her pedigree, the most influential dog as far as I was concerned at that time was an international dual champion, and English stinker. Well, now, of course, having seen photographs of him, I mean, he was an awful dog. Not the sort of dog.
That's line break to it.
But I decided that was the obvious dog to line breed. And my first litter was line bred to him. Well, it didn't turn out too badly. Because it produced me, the first litter produced me a champion, a dual CC winner, and a field trial first prize winner. So it didn't do too badly for me. But after that, I mean, I realised that wasn't quite the way to go, although I'd been very lucky.
So what were the strengths and weaknesses of this particular bitch?
Have I got to admit that?
Yes, please.
Well, frankly, she had very bad shoulders. And that is something which, of course, is very difficult to breed out. And I always remember the famous Bill Siggers. One of his great sayings was that the most difficult thing to breed out in dogs were incorrect shoulders, and it is quite true. But I decided that was her worst failing. She had a nice head. She was a very nice type, but she did win a CC and a reserve CC, but she wouldn't do that now. She's not good enough for that.
So you won a CC in reserve with the foundation?
Yes, I did. And having had that first litter, I realised I'd gone down the wrong road, although it did very well for me. But I decided that, obviously, to improve the shoulders, which I realised I needed to do, I needed to go to Mrs. Stennick's dogs. And I tried to use Champion Dorcas Roy as a slat, but he wouldn't do it. So we used her other stud dog, who got a couple of CCs, and that was Dorcas Timberscombe Topper, who had got very good shoulders, was a very nicely made dog. And that mating produced me Champion Cameron's Fantango, who of course for about 7 years was a leading sire in the breed. So dear old Tess for 8 guineas didn't do too bad.
Not bad. and I mean, with all due respect, sort of great success very quickly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it couldn't have been any better. It was absolutely wonderful. Really marvellous. And the first CC I ever won, that was, I always remember that, and I'm sure you want to know about that. It really,
Thank you for preempting the next question.
That's right. I remember it was the next question. It really was a thrill. I had no idea I'd ever do such a thing. And that was with Cameron's Anthony from my first litter. And that was a Paynton Championship show when it was in the park by the sea. And that was under, nobody here probably will remember him, it was Dr. Acton, who was secretary at the time of the, I think it was the Scottish Golden Retriever Club. And when he gave me the CC, I couldn't believe it, you know. This was absolutely marvellous, you know, the real beginning. And you never forget your first CC, I don't think. No, I don't think you do. Even though it's a long, long time ago, that was, I think, about 1949, probably, or 1950. 55 years ago, probably. But then after that, I made up his little sister, Anthea. She became a champion as well. She was a very nice little bitch, but the dog, of course, Anthony, he's had a great influence on my breeding plans.
So what was the relationship between those two and Fandango?
Half brothers.
Right, okay, so that came from the...
Yeah, from the foundation bitch. Anthony and Fandango were half brothers.
That's the same bitch.
Yeah, and through combining those with the other lines, that's how I founded my strain.
What I find rather interesting here is the fact that you've come along and I mean, in relative terms in those days, you were almost a newcomer.
I was.
With this dog, who obviously was being used by so many people that it could achieve the title of leading stud dog.
Yeah.
So there must have been some pretty sort of brave people in the breed then, or just astute enough to recognise a good stud dog.
Or stupid.
Maybe your stud fees were cheaper.
Well, they certainly were in those days. I think there were about 6 guineas in those days. £6, 6 shillings for those. I don't know.
So, how and why did this stud dog become so prepotent or significant?
I think because of his line breeding, he was quite closely line bred, you see.
Right.
His mother and his father, were very closely related on the bitch line, because Fantango's mother was Timberscombe bitch, and Dorcas Timberscombe Topper's mother was a Timberscombe bitch, and I was combining those lines.
Right.
So I think it was quite a closely line-bred line. I think Joan Gill was about the first one to dare to use him, actually, and she produced the champion.
And did he produce his own type consistently?
Yes, he did. Very much. He produced, I can't remember how many champions he produced, but it was quite a few.
Right.
And he had an awful lot of winners. But there weren't very many stud dogs in those days, Andrew.
Well, in this sort of period, what would be the average championship show entry? How many Goldens would you get at a show?
I suppose probably about 60.
Uh-huh.
I think we used to average normally around about 8 or 10 a class, something like that. We didn't have as many classes in those days either. No. But, as I say, Fantango really did put me on the map from the point of view of...
So how did you build up the kennel subsequently? I mean, did you go out and buy some new bitches that were sort of complementarily bred, or what?
I was lying in bed one night thinking...
Too much information.
I was lying in bed one night thinking, what should I do? How should I carry on? What should I do? And I had a friend who also had a Timberscombe bitch. And I said to him, would you like to mate her to Anthony? Because if you did, I'd like to have a bitch from her. So she said, oh yes, right. And the bitch actually only produced 2 puppies, and they were both bitches. I had the best one, she had the worst one. I was lucky, because I made that into champion camera at Tantara, and she was the beginning of my champion bitch line.
Right.
So that was how I sort of decided to go on. But I put a lot of thought. These people these days, they don't. They just sort of, oh, well, that's a nice dog, it's winning, we'll use that. I spent a lot of time working out pedigrees of what I should do in the future, for future generations. But they don't do that these days.
There's a lot of difference of opinion on the value of the extent of a pedigree. You talk to some breeders and they say that effectively anything beyond the 3rd generation isn't really of any great consequence. Have you got any strong feelings on that?
I think the closer the better. You see, I believe in very close line breeding. I've done a lot of very close line breeding, and if you haven't got any terrible faults, I think it's much the best way to go. I mean, I agree to a certain extent that, I mean, right, I think if you've got an outstanding dog in your pedigree several times way back, then I do think that that helps to stabilise things. But if you're just saying, well, you know, there's a dog in about the 5th generation, mine's got the same in about the 5th generation, I might use that. I don't think that has very much bearing on it at all.
Were there any particular features that you were keen to establish in your kennel type, consciously at this time?
Yes, there were. Perhaps not as early as that. No, probably not quite as early as that, a little bit later. I think at that time I was just wanting to win.
Surely not. The dog person wanted to win, whatever next.
I really don't think I was sort of thinking about, you know, stabilising anything, or it was just a matter of, you know,
being successful.
I want to be successful in the next generation. The next dog I have, I want to make it into a champion. I don't think really, you know, I was looking far enough ahead. This came a lot later, I think. I mean, later, of course, I did start to decide what I really liked. When you're starting in a breed, you don't really know what you really want. You've got to have experience before you really know what you want. I mean, you want to know the type you're going to have. And that does take a few years to decide.
At this point, had you become involved with any of the breed clubs in a capacity other than just a member?
No, I wasn't. Not as early as that. I was a member of other dog committees, obviously, but no, I was belonged to breed clubs, and soon after that, I think I was on the Golden Retriever Club committee, because I was on that for many, many years. I can't remember when I joined, but it was a long, long time ago. And I was chairman of the the Southern Golden Retriever Society when that was established, but that was later, much later.
So as the kennel progressed, somewhere along the line you actually judged your first dog show.
Not very long, actually.
So how did that come about?
It was only a little limited show I judged, first of all, quite local. I mean, we used to have a lot of limited shows in those days, and if you remember, as far back as that, Andrew, I don't know whether you can remember as far back as that, but...
As far as you can.
No, but when I first started, you could not judge open shows without the Kennel Club permission, just the same as you have to do now for a championship show. You had to fill in a form to say how many shows you've done and everything. So obviously you all started off with limited shows, and my first show that I did was a limited show. I think it was Hampshire Gun Dog or something like that, and I just judged Goldens, obviously. I don't know what year it was. I should think it was probably about 1952, something like that. It might have been earlier than that, but I'm not sure.
And how did you take to it?
Like a duck to water, I suppose. I don't know, perhaps it's awful, I don't know how I judged, but I can remember the dog that I, bitch rather, that I put up, and that was called, she was called Velvet of Rosecott. Not the sort of bitch I would really put up these days. Different type really.
In what way?
Just not the type I like now, should I say that?
So do you feel that your own personal preferences or your own interpretation have actually evolved over your sort of length of video?
Very much. I mean, you certainly does. I mean, it's bound to. You start off probably with no preconceived ideas, and then you get ideas. And if you're going to really become involved, you just don't stick to your original ideas. I mean, life goes on, dogs go on, different dogs come up, so you have to change your ideas. And you, I mean, I think I started off with a very different type from what I have now. I mean, all my original ones were dark. All the southern dogs were dark in those days. We used to have this north-south divide. The northern dogs were light, much heavier built than the southern dogs, much heavier boned. The southern dogs were all much darker and not having the same amount of substance as the northern dogs. And I think I was about the first person well-known person, because I was quite well known in those days, to use the northern dogs. And that set the rot in. I remember dear Joan Gill saying, "Oh my God, you can't use that dog. You can't possibly use that dog." Very soon after that, she was using all the same ones. It clicked, you see. I used the international champion Cabus Cadet, who was not, I mean, I gave him a certificate, but he was not my ideal, but he had the things that I wanted in my line. And I was very lucky that it gave me what I wanted.
So you mentioned that particular prefix, obviously, which leads us nicely into Christopher, which is a dog that is known universally in our MG Goldens. So let's have a little bit on the Christopher story, the history, and when you first set eyes on him as a puppy.
Oh, don't talk about that.
Yes, please.
Well, let's go back a bit further than that, Andrew, because when I used International Cabus Cadet, I used her on a Champion Camrose Talleyrand of Andrew's daughter, and that mating produced me 3 champions. Now, the owner of Cadet, who was a dear friend of mine, Zilpha Moriarty, or Morgan as she became, she thought, well, you know, it's done that for Joan, I'll try it out. So she used Talleyrand on her Cabus Cadet daughter, and that also produced 3 champions, not in the first litter, but in 2 litters. And Christopher was one of them. But now, if you want to know about choosing Christopher, there were about, I think it was 5 dogs in the litter, the bitches as well, but I didn't want a bitch. And I chose the one that was most my type. But he was not an outstanding puppy. I mean, I didn't really think anything very much of him. He was quite a plain puppy. And in fact, on the way home in the car, I called in to see a friend who was another golden retriever breeder, and Christopher was in the back. And she looked at it and she said, "What on earth is that you've got there?" That came to be the famous Christopher. Well, he really wasn't a pretty puppy at all. I wouldn't let anybody see him when they came to the kennels. They could see some of the other dogs I had, but they were not allowed to see Christopher. He had the most enormous woolly coat. You couldn't really see what was underneath it. He had a terrible front, and he was cow-hocked. And he
Sounds good so far.
Absolutely. I mean, that is what you expect in a top champion, isn't it?
So when did the ugly duckling decide to be a swan?
He decided to be a swan when he was just over 6 months. Everything started to go right by 6 months. And at 7 months, I took him out under somebody who really never liked him at all, and won the puppy class, and that was under Lucille Sortel. It was such a surprise to me that she put him up. But everything had gone right by that time, which was very fortunate. I mean, it doesn't very often happen like that. Don't believe if you've got a cow-hock puppy that it's going to come right, but they don't very often. He was the exception, I think. But after that, of course, he did very well, and he won his first CC when he was 2, and that was at a Brighton Championship show, and again, people probably won't remember her very much now, Mrs. Ada Welsh. And she was told afterwards, well, that dog will never get another CC. How wrong were they? So that was the beginning of his career.
Why do you think he was such a successful stud dog?
He was very prepotent. It's very difficult to know why a dog should be so prepotent. The only thing I can think of really is because he was a complete outcross, you see, which is very unusual to get an outcross like that.
So just tell us a little bit about the actual parents.
Well, you see, the mother's line, which was Berkeley line, they were very line-bred. I mean, that was a line-bred line. My own line, of course, was a line-bred line, and I can only think the combination of 2 line-bred lines, entirely different lines, but, I mean, why it should happen, I don't know, but I do think that it is something to do with the fact that both the parents were line-bred. I'm sure if they'd been complete hodgepodge pedigrees, it couldn't have worked. I mean, hodgepodge pedigrees, let's face it, they don't work in the end.
And what major virtues do you feel that Christopher was able to pass on?
Construction. Mainly, I would say construction and soundness. He was a very well constructed dog. I mean, he always took the eye of the all-rounders because he was, and he had this wonderful flowing movement. I used to watch him going around my paddock. I was watching around the bottom of the paddock, and I think, oh my God, that's how, you know, he used to just float around. It was wonderful to watch him move. I think that it was personality as well. He had terrific personality. Very, very balanced dog. Was really good type. His head was never his fortune. Never his fortune. It was all right, but it was never what you would call the ideal. It wasn't my ideal head at all, or anybody else.
How would you have improved the head?
I would have improved it with a stronger foreface and a nicer eye placement, really. But it was a good head, but it wasn't what I wanted. Not really, but he passed on beautiful heads. I mean, some of his bitches had most beautiful heads, or some of the dogs too. They, you know, really were beautiful. But I don't know why he should be so prepotent. And of course, the great thing always, which used to be a great embarrassment to me with the dog, going into either the Bestian show ring at the championships or the group, everybody used to think he looked so sweet, but I got so embarrassed because he would always either carry his leash or carry the cuff of my anorak. We used to go around, I used to go around with him hanging on to something always. Everybody thought it was wonderful. it was, you used to feel it was ridiculous in a breast show. But it seemed to work, and it worked the oracle.
Obviously.
Yeah.
And at a time when it was pretty rare, you took semen from Christopher.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm sure we'd all be interested to hear a little bit, first about how you made the decision, and a little bit about the logistics of this exercise, when, as I said, it wasn't anything like as commonplace as it is now, and also the subsequent benefits of the exercise.
Well, it wasn't done at all. I mean, Christopher, I think, was the first successful artificial insemination. And I was asked by a breeder in Norway if they could use his semen, and I didn't think it would work or anything. But she was in contact with a professor at the Oslo University, and he had been doing experimental work on Arctic foxes, inseminating them, and found he knew exactly how to do it. So he volunteered to come over to England with this breeder and took the semen from Christopher. And that was a rather difficult day. We did it at South Mimms Veterinary College. And when he'd got the semen taken and he'd got it all diluted in its egg yolk and put in its straws and frozen, he then, of course, had to have some liquid nitrogen to transport it in the container back to Norway. But there wasn't any liquid nitrogen in the college at all, and this was a Saturday. And we had a terrible job finding anywhere we could get liquid nitrogen. We did eventually find some in one of the hospitals, so that was okay. And that litter produced 9 puppies. And this was done through inseminating into the vagina, which was done in those days. I mean, normally it was done like that, but it was very dodgy because it didn't very often work. You had to know someone who really knew how to do it. But this professor was very good, and we got that. And after that, I got inquiries from various other countries, you see. And then Dr. David Morton started taking semen. And so there were various puppies in different countries. And the best semen of all was sent out to Australia, and they've had, I don't know how many litters out there from that semen. And but they've always done it surgically. And if you do it surgically, you don't need to use as many straws. For instance, this last litter, which I've done a year ago, I think it was 4 straws we had, that was all. Whereas in the early days, you had to have 12 straws at least, and you had to inseminate them at least twice. So you needed about 24 straws, whereas now you need so few. But of course, it has to be done surgically. But it is much the most... Yeah. And now, of course, the Kennel Club have, I don't know whether you've had the recent thing, but I've just had a recent thing from the Kennel Club saying that they're doing this leaflet now to let everybody know about the logistics of it, because people haven't had any idea how to do it or anything, because of course it wasn't allowed until a year or so ago. I mean, I haven't stored this semen. I was very lucky that his friend in Australia had saved some semen, and
this is the stuff that you've used recently?
Used recently, yes, which was taken 30 years ago, of course. And it's only within the last 2 years, I think, that the Kennel Club have allowed it, since we got the new chairman. He did tell me several years ago he thought it was going to come. And of course, when he got into control, it did come. Because I applied originally, and they said, no, of course, you can't use semen from a dead dog. So that's about the story of
it's a very sort of, it's still quite a sort of tricky area. And when you're dealing with another breeder, when you're talking about AI, there has to be an incredible level of trust, don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, it's very difficult, really. It doesn't matter how many papers you sign, it doesn't really make any difference. You have to be able to trust them. And the problem is with the semen that I sent over to Australia, I didn't really have any idea as to what they were going to do. I sent it out to be used on one bitch, and then suddenly found they'd been using it on I don't know how many bitches. So for one stud fee, they probably had 10 litres.
I think that this is one of the areas where people get a little bit nervous about
Yes,
it.
absolutely.
In that there's that sense of your, once it's done, you've kind of lost control.
You have, absolutely. You have. Very difficult.
So, having gone through the whole AI business and almost up until the present time, how do you feel that's benefited the breed?
In this country, of course, it hasn't really benefited because we haven't been able to use it.
No.
But I think it's benefited breeds abroad because they've been able to import semen from England. Now, of course, you can import semen from anywhere. And it depends on whether, in this country, in our breed particularly, whether we want to use any dogs abroad. Are there any dogs as good abroad as we've got in England? We haven't got very many good dogs in England, even so.
Do you find the Scandinavians are particularly sort of progressive?
They were, certainly.
Yeah.
Yes, very definitely. I mean, they've used a lot of AI, of course, from various dogs. And they have had wonderful type shows there. When I first started judging over there, they were not good. I mean, they really were very, very poor. And they've done very well. Improved the breed a lot. But I don't know that there's anything over there now that one would want to use right now.
And I mean, is the sort of Christopher blood now pretty much sort of ingrained through the breed?
It is. I mean, if you go back, you have to go back a long way now in pedigrees, of course, because it's a long way back.
Yeah.
But there are very, very few dogs really in this country that haven't got Christopher in the background.
Right.
One or two lines never had Christopher in them, but most lines have got Christopher if you go back to about the 10th generation. My own have got Christopher about 10 times, I think, but that's very natural.
Tell me, John, have you always worked your show dogs?
Yeah, I have, because I started, when I had my first dogs, it was the dumb thing. You had to work your dogs if you wanted to make them into a champion, you see. You couldn't have show champions. So I used to have great fun with mine. There were no training classes in those days, so I used to have a starting pistol, and I used to get pigeons or pheasants from the butchers, and I used to go up onto the local downs, and I used to fire off my starting pistols and train them like that. I mean, anybody can do that. Now you don't need to do that. You've got your training classes. But of course, you have to if you want to become a champion, or have to, or even now if you want to become a champion, you have to train your dogs. So I started straight away training my dogs, and I later on, not to begin with, but when I found that I could get picking up, I used to go out picking up 3 times a week. I used to take 3 or 4 dogs out always, and I used to thoroughly enjoy it. But then I broke my hip, and so that stopped it. I didn't do any more after that, unfortunately. But the first dog that I tried to train, I didn't know anything about training, and I was told, well, you have to send it to a trainer. And that broke my heart, having to send it to a trainer. And this was Camrose Anthony, and he was at the trainer for about 2 months, and then he gave him back to me. He said, I can't do anything with him. You do everything, but he's gun shy. As soon as I pick up a gun, he goes. So I thought, this is ridiculous. So I used to sit in my front room every day with the starting pistol and biscuits. And I used to fire off the starting pistol and give him a biscuit. And days and days I worked like that, and I had no problem. I qualified as easily as anything. That was perseverance from you. I mean, a trainer gave up, but I did.
Cute story.
Yeah,
Do you have strong feelings about gun dogs actually having some element of work in their training?
I think they should, because I mean they love it. It is their great delight. I mean, if you have been out on shoots with your dogs, you know that they really just love it. And my best dog was Christopher. I mean, he was a wonderful worker. He loved it, and he'd face any cover, and he would never tire. The greatest compliment I had out picking up with him was at the end of the day. I was picking up still those that were left behind with a Labrador breeder, and her dog was sort of, oh, I couldn't go into those brambles, I'm too tired. Christopher was still ploughing through everything, and she said to me, "Does your dog never tire?" I thought that was a great compliment. And that was typically Christopher, he never did tire. So I always worked them, and I ran several in field trials, not very successfully, but I did get some awards. And I must go back to some stories about Joan Gill, who, you know, feels so sad still that she's not with us. It's broken my heart. But there was one time we went up, we ran up in a field trial. The three of us went up together, and we went to Banchory in Scotland. It was a Golden Retriever Club of Scotland trial, and we had great fun up there. It was a long time ago, and the trainer who was there was Jim Cranston, who actually trained international champion, dual champion David of Westley. He was a wonderful trainer, and he was great fun. And we'd all sort of retired to our rooms, and we hadn't been in our bedroom very long. There was a knock on the door, and Jim came in, absolutely tight. I mean, as you would expect in Scotland, I do like that. And he said, in his Irish accent, "Come on, Joe, there's a pheasant in a tree down the drive. You've got to come and get it." Anyway, that trial was a dead loss for us. None of us, all three of us, we got nothing. But I did manage to get a qualifying certificate with champion Cameron's Loretta, so it wasn't a wasted day.
No.
But that's a little bit of background.
When your kennel was at its height, and I'm talking about numbers now specifically, can you just tell us a little bit about the sort of the actual day-to-day running of the kennel as regards exercise, the number of dogs you kept, how they were housed, fed, whatever? Because, you know, we talk so much these days about, you know, the demise of the large kennels. How did it work for you? Did you have staff and so on?
I had a lot of dogs. No, I didn't have staff at all. No, I had, at one time, when Rosemary was living with us, we had about 20 Goldens, I think, and American Cockers and Beagles we had. And we used to do it between us. Always, dogs were fed twice a day, first in the morning, and they were never fed these all in one thing. They were always fed. It wasn't raw meat in those days because you couldn't get it. It was always tinned meat and biscuit meal. And exercising, we didn't take them out for exercise because we had a big paddock, and they were always just exercised in the paddock. And it was never really it's never very difficult if you've got that number of dogs. But my dogs have never all lived in kennels, and even when we had 20, they all came in the house. None of them were kennelled. I don't think any were ever kennelled.
Well, did you rotate them? Or?
Yeah, yes, we did. And sometimes in our dog room we'd have about 12 or 13 dogs in there all together. Now we've cut it down. I only have 10 now, which is quite enough. But we did have a lot in those days.
When you said you never fed complete feed, so did you ever go down a sort of additive route, or what exactly were you feeding?
No, just don't want to advertise.
No.
Tin dog food and wholemeal biscuit meal.
Get a sponsorship deal going.
Oh, that's a good idea. No, we always fed that. Before that, I used to get a lot of meat from the knackers. I used to be able to get knackered meat, and I got to the stage I really couldn't bear it. I'd go up to the knacker, and I used to see carcasses, and I couldn't stand it. So I decided, no, it's much better to have tinned food.
If we sort of take Christopher out of the equation for a minute, at what age do you like to pick puppies?
Oh, never. Well, I never look at my puppies until they're about 5 or 6 weeks. I mean, some people pick them eggs. I just don't. I mean, I see puppies and I see they're nice puppies, but I never look at them critically at all until they're about 5 or 6 weeks. And then I start to look at them and I don't make any decisions at all because that's fatal. I try to make my decision between, say, 2 by the time they're 8 weeks. But even that isn't any good because Rosemary will remember this. When we had Champion Cameron's fabulous Tarquin as a puppy, he was the one in the litter that was going to go as a pet. He wasn't going to be kept as a show dog at all because he was very light in bone and he hadn't got much head. And we kept him on with the one that we decided to keep because I think we hadn't sold him. And at 10 weeks, he suddenly turned out to be much, much better than the one we were going to keep. And the one we were going to keep never turned out to be any good at all. So I would never, ever finally want to make a decision at 8 weeks. The longer you can leave it, the better. With the Christopher litter, we kept 4 until they were nearly 8 months to decide which to keep. Because it's well, you really, if you can run them on it, much better. But you mean, most people just can't run several dogs on. It's not very easy.
I've always been fascinated, I must admit, by these breeders who say they can pick them white.
Yeah, I know people who say they can. Oh, you know, look at them. I never even look at them.
You've got to see them up on the legs running
Oh,
around before you...
You see, I don't pick my puppies by standing them on a table. I pick my puppies when they're running around. I look at them critically and see the balance of the puppies and, you know, their whole attitude. And then, when I sort of sort out, you know, the ones that I really like that, then I'll pick them up and look at their heads. But I don't. If you put a puppy on the table, you can make it look anything.
Oh, exactly.
I mean, it's nothing to say what they're really
It's
like.
very, it's very much a modern thing. I know.
Oh, I know.
I go and visit
does it.
so many breeders in
I
different breeds.
know.
It's got to go on the table, and then out
yes.
comes the protractor
Yeah,
to check the angle and the shoulder blade and whatever.
Yeah.
And you know, if you just have them mooching around the backyard,
Absolutely.
because
that's just how I would
so
do
much of it is carriage, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is. And whole balance of the puppy, very definitely.
What about, I mean, it's not the most difficult breed, obviously, to train for the show ring, but I mean, what about sort of bringing puppies on as regards, you know, lead work and road work and whatever?
We don't do it.
Okay.
We don't. We very often take out our puppies and they've never been on a leash before.
Right.
Or at least they've been on a leash in the front garden to see how to go. But never do we ever do any ring training with them because you get bored. You get so many people with puppies. They stack them and poor puppies get so bored. I mean, I like to see a puppy go into the ring and be really happy. And
naughty.
And naughty. I
And
mean,
puppies.
all ours are. I mean, poor Rogan's had a terrible time with some of our puppies recently because they're full of character. But I mean, if you've got a dog that's like that and you let it do that, it comes to it in the end and you haven't lost that joy of it. I mean, the whole showing should be a joy, not a bore, not a chore. They should enjoy it, and ours do. I mean, they love it.
I think there's nothing worse than seeing an exhibitor that is actually knocking exuberance out of the puppy.
Absolutely.
It drives me nuts.
And me too. I mean, I think it's such a shame because, particularly with a breed like this, which is such a happy breed, and if you're going to, you know, all these ring crosses, they take them to, you know, week after week, poor little things, you know, boring to tears.
Sure. We're now going to take the discussion with Joan in a slightly different direction and talk in a little bit more general terms rather than talking about her own dogs. And first of all, Joan, when you first came into the breed, what was it about the Golden Retriever as a breed that attracted you and said, right, I have to have this breed?
Well, I did say that when I've had first time I saw a Golden Retriever, and that was with my aunt, and it was this beautiful head and expression, this lovely, soft, gentle expression, and the lovely temperament. I mean, absolutely, you know, gorgeous temperament. It wasn't to do really with structure or anything to do with that. It was just this lovely, lovely head, sweet, gentle grin on the face, typical golden grin, and the lovely, lovely nature.
I mean, initially you were looking on them as just a companion.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, we've discussed the obvious, or we've praised the successes of the kennel. We could have gone on for many hours more, but we're limited on time. Looking back on your time in Golden Retrievers, what do you think about the overall standard of the breed now? And where are the breeders doing a good job? And where possibly could they be doing better?
Well, I think those of you who know me and who probably heard some of my comments or seen some of my comments on the internet, well, now I don't think much of them these days, frankly. I feel very sad about the breed now because I think there are far too many people coming into this breed who just want to breed a litter because it's going to pay for their holiday, or they want to climb up the ladder and start judging. There are not very many what I call dedicated breeders. Far too many people are just pet owners who've got dogs in their show. This isn't any good for the future of the breed. You need dedicated breeders who think about the future of the breed. And I think this has been the downfall of the present day dogs. If you want to know what I think about them structurally, I'm sorry to say that you look at ringfuls of dogs. I do. I sit now, I can't show my dogs. I sit at the ringside and I watch them. And I see dog after dog after dog, bitch after bitch after bitch. They've got short legs. They're not balanced. And this is the general aspect these days. And the unfortunate thing is now that it is becoming the norm. And it's changing the breed. Golden Retrievers are not supposed to be short-legged, long-bodied dogs. They're supposed to be dogs with legs and balance. If you haven't got a balanced dog, you're not going to get complete soundness, because invariably these short legs mean that you get these dogs that they can't stride out. You get very short strides. And the other thing that I find is very, very bad nowadays is we're getting so many far too over-angulated hindquarters, almost like German Shepherds. Golden Retrievers are never meant to be like that. They're meant to have a good turn of stifle, but not to be angulated, as so many of them are.
It's across the breeds, though, isn't it? It's not
completely
though.
Well, you know more than I do about that.
Particularly in the HBR breeds, I think. Which seems
yes,
to be,
I agree.
I mean, in a lot of those breeds, it's an American thing. But I mean,
It
I
is
don't know
an
whether you
American
can
thing,
attribute that.
I think, but I mean, you can't
be the case.
Not with our breed, no. No, I can't understand why it's happened or how it's happened, really. It obviously is coming through some particular dogs, but I can't account for it. But it is a very damaging thing, because immediately you get these very, very over-angulated hindquarters. You get a weakness in back, because invariably you've got a long body to get those. And then we have so many upright shoulders, so you've got completely unbalanced dogs. You can't move freely if you've got an upright shoulder and an over-angulated hindquarter.
And you'll never get the rear drive.
You can't. People think, you see, you've got that wonderful hind angulation, so you're really striding, driving with the hindquarters. You don't. You know that. It doesn't work.
I mean, if you get two dogs and one has a tendency towards being a little bit straight and one is horribly over-angulated, the slightly straighter two will always move a bit more power than
absolutely. Of course it does. If you haven't got the power, you get weakness if you've got an over-angulated hindquarter. People don't realise this, I think. The trouble is we've got so many judges now who are sort of following suit because they've seen other people put them up. Another failing in the breed, which I also find very distressing now, is coats. The number of Golden Retrievers these days that have silky setter coats with no undercoat and no feathering. This is not typical. Our breed should have a slightly harsh coat, not a setter silky coat, and it should have a very, very dense undercoat. If you look at most of the Goldens in the ring today, you won't find very many of them that have got a really typical dense coat with undercoat, and so many of them have very little feathering. Tummy feathering seems to be out. In fact, we have been told that one of our dogs, well, you'll never do any winning unless you cut his tummy feathering off. I mean, what about that? And that was by a judge. I mean, Goldens are supposed to have feathering. But you see, with this tendency to short legs, if you didn't cut off the tummy feathering, it would nearly touch the ground. I think this is method in the madness, unfortunately.
Is there any sort of correlation between coat texture and colour in the breed?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. No, I don't.
So you can find the similar range of
Oh,
textures
yes,
within the
absolutely.
different shades?
I mean, I've got well, I've got very dark dogs and I've got blonde dogs, and it really doesn't make any difference, no. I've got probably the darkest golden retriever bitch that anybody's ever seen, and you probably will never see her because she's so dark. She's very beautiful, but I won't show her because these days that colour is not, it's not popular. And this is another thing I find is rather detrimental to the breed, really, is the fact that we are getting ringfuls and ringfuls of cream dogs. I think it's an awful pity, because I think the great joy of golden retrievers is the lovely variety of colours. I mean, there's nothing more lovely than seeing, as we have at home, all these different shades, you know, from dark to medium to cream. Lovely colours, I love them all. But if you're going to always have ringfuls and ringfuls of cream dogs, what's going to happen? If you're going to keep, this is a great thing I've got, I really don't agree with this, but I don't care. I believe that I'm correct, that if you keep on breeding cream to cream for generation after generation, you're going to lose your other colour. Why always use cream dogs? Because they're popular, because they win. But why? That's the judgment.
But you've just said that you want this bitch who is obviously an acceptable colour, albeit slightly dark.
Yes,
well, why not go out there and blaze a trail?
Because I wouldn't win with her. Well, there are about 2 judges probably in the country that I would win under, and that's about all, you see.
Right.
And she, of course, came from a litter of half cream and half dark.
Right.
So, I mean, I get this variety of shades because I've always had cream ones and I've had dark ones. And so I don't lose my colour. But a lot of these kennels now that are breeding, always breeding a cream dog back to a cream bitch and going on like that. As I say, if you go on like that for generation, you're bound to lose colour. I mean, it's a sort of, it's a fact of nature that cream to cream generations are going to produce cream. You're going to get progressively, you're going to get rid of the other colours. I mean, I like the creams, I prefer light gold ones, but I think that is something people want to watch a little bit in the breed. But the most important thing to watch is these short legs, frankly, and these over-angulated hindquarters, because we're not getting balanced goldens now. And you have a lot of new judges coming in, you see, and of course, if these dogs are winning, these new judges can't put them down, they've got to put them up, haven't they? And that is really being very, very difficult in the breed now.
So you're losing the basic shape?
We are losing the basic shape of the golden retriever, which should literally be square. You should have the same length of leg from the elbow to the ground that you have from the elbow to the withers. And that whole leg up to the withers should balance and be square with the withers to the root of the tail. But it isn't. Never. Very, very seldom.
Do you feel that, I have to be very careful how I word this one, do you feel that some specialist judges are perhaps a little forgiving of movement?
Very definitely. I do. Very definitely, Andrew. And this is why I feel, I mean, I know it's something which you probably feel I wouldn't agree with, but I do feel that we do need far more all-rounders judging our breed, because we get some terribly bad movers put up. And this is the thing, when you're judging as an all-rounder, I mean, I know myself when I've judged groups and things like that, you don't judge the same as if you're a specialist in the breed. You're judging on soundness, movement, quality. But if you're a specialist judge, you're just going, a lot of the judges are going on sort of breed points rather than structure, soundness. And if you're not going to take into consideration soundness, which is movement, I mean, well, we do have quite a few champions that have got cow hocks, which I think is terrible. I mean, I have never contemplated a dog which has got a cow hock because it's unsound.
I mean, I know personally, I find it rather alarming when I do the odd commentary for the group judging at the championship shows, and you know, and now this is the best. 376 golden retrievers from 2 judges, and something is going away from that. Well, what must the rest of them be like?
Yeah, well, that's quite true, Andrew. And that's why, as I say, I do feel that if you get all-rounders, they pick up these faults, and we do need to have more all-rounders, but I mean good all-rounders, not just all-rounders that really don't know what they're playing at.
That leads me very, very nicely into the next question, which is this, and it's something which was posed by Rick Beauchamp in various American magazines, which I'll just rephrase slightly. Someone comes up to you at a show and says, Mrs. Tudor, I have just been asked to take over Golden Retrievers. I've never judged the breed before. Could you tell me the most important elements of breed type that I must look for and what I can forgive? What would you say to them?
What would I say to them? Don't judge. Learn about your breed first of all. Why on earth judge something you don't know anything about?
I think in fairness it was a hypothetical question.
Very definitely, I'm sure it was. Very definitely. I mean, no way should you be judging it unless you really know what you're looking for. And what can you forgive? Well, you don't just forgive one thing. You judge the dog as a whole, don't you?
So just try to encapsulate that, the essence of the golden fawn. We've talked about the shape, we've talked about the temperament, we've talked about the variety of colours. I mean, is there anything else there that you feel is important? You said you need more non-specialist judges. What would you want to instill on the better element of those that might get let loose on your breed?
What do you mean, the all-rounders? Don't go for these short-legged ones. Go for balance, which I'm afraid it doesn't always happen. We're still getting all-rounders putting up these short-legged ones.
Well, presumably those are the all-rounders that would fall into your category of following,
Well, yes, probably.
following suit or
Probably, I think so. Yes.
whatever. On this subject, what do you feel about the way judges are trained in this country? I mean, I would imagine that your breed clubs in Golden Retrievers probably require huge numbers of both classes and dogs judged before anyone can progress significantly up the judging lists. So do you think the Kennel Club and the system have got it right? Or do you think perhaps things could be adjusted?
I don't think the Kennel Club got it right at all. I'm very critical of it. I think you are to a certain extent too. But I'm very critical of the present method of these stupid seminars, as you said in an article recently, which I thought was absolutely correct. You know, 1, 2, 3, which answer is the correct one sort of style. That's not the way to judge Golden Retrievers or any breed at all.
Tick box mentality.
Well, it's just not. I mean, it isn't the way to. These seminars, I've done lots of seminars, and people, they think they know it all when they've been to a seminar, but they forget it all. And that is not the way to learn to judge dogs. To be able to judge a dog, you've really got to have an eye for a dog, and that's something which I think you said recently too in an article. You must have an eye for a dog. You can't just say, I'm going to judge dogs, and you don't know anything about them or what they should be like. And to get an eye for a dog, I really feel that you must own good dogs. I've always said this, if you've got a lot of rubbish in your kennels, how are you going to judge? I mean, you think those, if you can have rubbish in your kennels, you obviously think those are all right. Well, you're not going to be much of a judge, are you? I do feel really that it's very important that people who are going to judge have got good dogs, have either bred them or owned them, and know what they want. And I think that it's very important with new judges to sit round the ringside and look at dogs. A lot of dogs at a lot of different shows and in different parts of the country. And that is a way to get your eye in far more than just having a few seminars and going over a few dogs.
Do you not think that today perhaps we've become rather sort of tunnel visioned about things? I mean, you said before we actually started today that when you were starting off, you lived virtually next door to Leo Wilson, who was one of the great all-rounders of yesteryear, someone who had that kind of Stockman mentality. I mean, I think that, and a lot of it, I think, is probably down to the popularity and the numbers in the breeds involved. If you show Golden Retrievers, you go and all you do is sit the golden ring, and you don't have time to go and look at anything else. But do you not think that part of this educating the eye can be helped by going around looking at other breeds, and indeed other animals, horses, cattle, pigs,
Definitely,
whatever?
I think some of the best judges of all of dogs are people who've had horses, frankly. Because if you learn the structure of horses, I think you get an eye for a dog, just the same. I mean, it's a similar sort of structure. And so many of the really, what I would call, knowledgeable breeders have started off with horses. And again, I quite agree with you that looking at other dogs too, because if you, would you say, you get a tunnel vision for one breed, you're not looking at anything else, you're not really, you're never going to be any good doing other breeds at all if you just sort of sit at your own ring and you don't look at anything else. But to be a good judge, the most important thing, I think, is to have this eye for quality. And that is something you can never be taught. Nothing on earth can teach you to be able to assess quality. It's got to be something that you've got inside you to be able to do this. And far too many of the people judging today, they have not that idea at all. And as I say, these Kennel Club certificates, you can have a fistful of certificates and you still don't know a good dog. You must be able to know what is your own what type you like, and to be able to pick out soundness and quality. I just don't think that these seminars are any good at all. And why, another thing, why should you have to steward? I mean, I've never stewarded in my life. No. I mean, why should you have to steward? What good does that do you? I can't see that at all. And you're not teaching you anything about dogs at all.
But going back to what you said about people with horsey backgrounds, sort of translating so easily into dogs, I find that people who do have a background in horses, I mean, I've never had anything to do with horses, they pick up on basic soundness instinctively, whereas a lot of sort of pure dog people, you know, we have a lot of dogs in the show ring that are not actually lame, but they're not 100% sound. And the really beautifully constructed dogs, I've always said, they move with this incredible effortlessness. And horsey people always seem to appreciate that, and they can spot the dog that's gimping slightly, whereas our sort of very, very specialist-minded people sometimes don't even see it.
No, but the thing is, if you're a horsey person, if you've got a horse that isn't absolutely sound, you soon know about it. So it's something which, if you are a horsey person and you ride, you would pick it up very quickly. So I'm quite sure you would assess it much easier if you're used to horses and you're assessing dogs. It's a very similar sort of thing, but I mean, if you, as I say, if you've got a horse that isn't absolutely sound, you'll soon be off. You wouldn't be able to cope with that.
Have you judged the breed in the United States?
Yes, I have.
And how did you find them? When were you there last?
Well, I was there last about 15 years ago, something like that, I think, possibly. But I didn't like them. I mean, they're not, well, they are golden retrievers, but they're not golden retriever type. And they may be better now, I don't know, but I found the predominant failings there were heads. Heads were not good. They had very flat, broad skulls, rather narrow, long forefaces, and obliquely set eyes, which is not typical of a golden retriever.
Those sort of the Oriental expression.
Oriental
is
expression.
Really weird.
Really horrible, but a lot of them were like that. And of course, they're much longer on the leg than ours are. Terrific movers. I mean, they're great on their movement over there. They go round and round and round, almost like German shepherds. But again, they had very, very silky coats. I don't know what the undercoats were like. I don't think they had any. But
I mean, would you say that some of the colours over there are just too dark?
Well, yes, they're very, very dark. When I was over there, there were no light ones being shown at all. They were all very dark. And I went to spectate at one show where a dog that I'd sent over there and had become a Canadian champion, he was being shown, I think it was Detroit. And I watched the judge going over him, and she went straight to her table and looked up the standard. and then he wasn't placed at all. And you see, obviously, the standard, you see, doesn't accept cream. It just says any shade of lustrous gold. It doesn't mention cream. And so he, he wasn't contemplated at all. He was the only cream one in the ring at all. So she obviously had never seen a cream one before, I don't think.
There's incredibly, I believe I'm right in saying that this past year, it's the first time in 25 years that the imported golden has actually been titled in America, which was the bits that went in from Sweden.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
So they tell me.
Oh, really?
It's something that went from Henry Strand over to Donny Sturts, and apparently that's the first
I mean, it would be, because there certainly haven't been.
import in 25 years.
Yes, because the last import I remember that became champion over there was Figaro Gio, one of Mrs. Sawtell's many, many years ago. I don't remember any others, because, of course, the type is so different. I'm very surprised about one of Henrik's, because I wouldn't have thought it was the type at all.
It had a bit of a tough time, apparently, but
it probably did. I mean, you can do it in Canada, and make up in Canada, of course, but it's in the States it's very difficult. And of course you have to have the top handlers there.
That's another hot potato.
Absolutely, yes.
Going back through the sort of breeding programme and the showing and whatever, if you could have your time again, would you have done anything different? Honestly?
Yeah, I think the thing I would have done differently probably would have been to have had more Christopher children when he was around. I only had 3, and they all became champions. One, of course, was Christopher, one was Stephanie, who still is the top bitch in the country. I mean, she's been dead, 25 years or something, and she's still top bitch. She was a beautiful bitch. And a Stenbreak dog. I think I would have kept others if I'd realised at the time the potential that he had. But that's looking back. I think that's the only thing. Well, I probably would have done lots of things differently, of course, but that's the thing I can really think of.
Tell me a little bit about your judging career outside of Goldens.
Well, I think the first other breed I judged, I mean at championship level, was Labradors. I think that was right. I think that was the first breed I judged. I mean, I judged them a lot of times. I judged them at Crofts, and the very funny thing was a few years ago, when I was going to be judging a club championship show, Labradors, and the breed note writer, I don't know which paper it was in, wrote to me and said, could you tell us, have you judged Labradors before? Well, I judged them at Crofts.
Erica will tell us which breed no writer afterwards.
I thought that was rather funny.
Have you made a sort of conscious decision not to pursue a career as an all-rounder, or is that just the way it panned out? Or
Never even thought about it. I just imagine if you've been asked to judge breeds, I've judged them. I hadn't really thought about it. I didn't start out with any idea of judging anything other than golden retrievers, but it just sort of takes off somehow or other, and I don't know how it happened really. It just happened. As a Labrador was the first other dog I judged at championship level. I think the next breed probably was Weimaraners. And that was very strange, because I was phoned up one day from the club secretary to say, will you judge our championship show? And I think I'd only judged them about twice. I said, no, I'm not eligible. I could never understand. So I did the club show, or the open show after that. And then I think, I don't know what I judged next. Whether I judged American Cockers next, probably. As I was showing American Cockers, of course. And it just took off, and then I had the right number of breeds, and somebody asked me to judge a group. I don't know who, can't remember where it was. I think it was at Bingley Hall I did, which was my first group. But I can't remember what show it was. And I never thought about judging any other breeds. I don't think I've ever judged beagles. I showed them. Not much success, but I showed them. And I loved them, but I never really thought of judging other breeds. I wasn't really interested.
quite happy with the gun dog group?
Yep.
Do you think as you judge the sort of other breeds in your own group, particularly the sort of related breeds, let's talk about the retrievers in general. Does that change your perspective in any way on your own breed?
Yes, I think it does, because if you're judging the other breeds, in that group, you realise, of course, very much the difference that you've got to realise. And, of course, I think you do begin to realise how much you should concentrate on soundness in your own breed. And I don't think soundness has ever been to the fore in golden retrievers, frankly. There's so much unsoundness.
I think it's a very good way of actually understanding where your own breed falls down. When you look at other breeds and find out how good they are in that particular area.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm.
So, how would you like to be remembered?
Well, now then, firstly, I think I would like to be remembered as a discriminating breeder who had the good of the breed at heart, and as someone who really loved her dogs, which I do.
Well, I think that comes through loud and clear, so I'd like to say, Joan Tudor, it's been a pleasure and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.